Hey there, welcome to the Side Farm podcast. I'm Amber, voice from Windows, and I'm excited to have you with us. Here, we dive into the world of farming, sustainability, and rural living, sharing stories and insights straight from Side Farm and beyond. In each episode, we take the essence of Side Farm's note articles and podcast episodes, summarize them in English using NotebookLM, and bring them to you through engaging conversations. Whether you're a seasoned farmer, a foodie, or just curious about agriculture, there's something here for everyone. So grab your favorite beverage, get comfy, and let's jump into today's episode of the Side Farm podcast.
Welcome in, everybody. We're diving deep today into something that honestly might sound a little dry at first, but trust me, it's fascinating. Seed sovereignty in Japan.
Well, sounds like a challenge.
It is a bit, right? I mean, you hear all the time about Japan struggling to be self-sufficient with food, and well, yeah, that overall rate is only about 30%, which gets debated a lot.
Right.
But here's the thing that really surprised me when I was digging into this. The self-sufficiency rate for vegetable seeds is even lower, like way lower. It's at 10%.
Wow.
Yeah. Crazy, right. So basically that means Japan imports roughly 90% of its vegetable seeds.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant amount.
It is, and this fact often gets presented as like a big alarm bell,
Yeah.
like there's some shadowy corporate scheme going on.
Right, it's easy to jump to that conclusion.
Yeah, but the sources you shared paint a much more nuanced picture.
Yeah, I think the narrative tends to get oversimplified a lot. What's interesting is it's not so much a case of foreign companies, just like dominating the market. Major Japanese seed companies like Taki, Sakata, Asahi, they're actually the ones choosing to produce a lot of their seeds overseas.
Okay, so this isn't like a forced dependency situation. This is a strategic decision by these Japanese companies.
Right.
I'm already intrigued.
Yeah.
So why would they choose to do that?
Well, it might seem kind of counterintuitive at first, but when you look deeper, there are a lot of solid reasons for this approach. I mean, first of all, just think about Japan's geography, its climate.
Right.
I mean, the country's prone to earthquakes, typhoons, unpredictable weather patterns. Having all your seed production in one place creates a huge vulnerability.
No, totally.
Yeah.
You're putting all your eggs in one very shaky basket.
Exactly. And that's where overseas production comes in. It spreads the risk.
So it's like diversifying your investments, but for food security.
Exactly. It's all about managing risk, ensuring a stable supply of seeds. And it goes beyond just natural disasters, too. Overseas production allows these companies to take advantage of different climates and growing conditions.
So you can optimize for quality and production cycles?
Yeah, basically it's not just about safety, it's also about efficiency.
Okay, that's starting to shift my perspective a bit.
And it's also important to remember that Japanese seed companies are global leaders in innovation. They're constantly developing new varieties, improving yields, contributing to global food security. This overseas production isn't about cutting corners. It's often about accessing the best expertise and resources to drive those innovations forward.
That's a good point that often gets missed in that, self-sufficiency at all costs argument. Sometimes the most effective solution involves collaboration.
Right.
And leveraging global expertise.
Absolutely. I think it challenges us to think outside of those simple narratives and consider the complexities of the global food system. It's not always as clear-cut as local is good, global is bad.
Yeah. One of the sources actually had this great anecdote about plastic packaging for vegetables, which I thought really illustrated this point.
Okay.
Consumers in Japan often complain about excessive plastic wrapping, seeing it as wasteful and unnecessary.
Right.
But as the source explained, that packaging actually plays a crucial role in maintaining freshness and hygiene, especially in Japan's humid climate.
It makes sense.
Yeah. And it's a case where well-intentioned concerns can sometimes miss the bigger picture.
Right. It's kind of like a parallel to the seed debate, right? Sometimes what appears to be a negative on the surface, like overseas production or plastic packaging, is actually a solution to a complex problem.
It's all about context.
Yeah, driven by this desire to deliver the best possible product to the consumer.
Okay, so we're going beyond the slogans here. What does all of this mean for the average person in Japan? The person buying and eating these vegetables.
Well, I think it encourages a shift in perspective. Just because something is labeled as imported doesn't make it inherently bad.
Right.
Or inferior. In the case of vegetable seeds, it's often a deliberate strategy by Japanese companies to make sure there's a stable, high-quality, and diverse food supply for their own people.
So it's not necessarily corporate greed or loss of control,
Right.
as some might assume,
It's a more complex situation than that.
with lots of factors at play.
Yeah, and it also highlights the need for more transparency from these companies. If consumers understood the reasons behind these practices, they might be less likely to jump to those negative conclusions.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a human element to this, too. The sources talked about the frustration these companies feel when their efforts are misunderstood.
Sure.
Like they're trying to do what's best for Japan's food security, and then they get criticized for practices that actually benefit consumers.
It's a reminder that there are real people behind these decisions.
Absolutely.
People who are passionate about providing quality food for their country.
I'm already starting to rethink some of my own assumptions about seed sovereignty in Japan.
Well, that's the beauty of a deep dive, right?
Mm.
It forces us to confront our biases and embrace a more nuanced understanding of complex issues.
I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, so we've unpacked this idea that Japanese seed companies strategically produce overseas to ensure quality and stability. But there's always another layer to peel back, right? What about the role of the government in all of this? And those picture-perfect veggies I always see in Japanese markets, are those two things connected somehow?
You're right. It's not just about corporate decisions. The government and consumer preferences definitely play a big role here, too. The sources you shared point out that the Japanese government does have policies to encourage domestic seed production. They offer subsidies and fund research and development, all aimed at boosting that self-sufficiency rate.
So they are trying to move that number up from 10%. They are making an effort.
Yes, but this is where the consumer comes in. Japanese shoppers are known for having really high standards, especially when it comes to how their produce looks.
Yeah, those flawless, blemish-free fruits and vegetables. It's like an art form in Japanese supermarkets.
Exactly. And to achieve that level of visual perfection, you often need specific seed varieties, and sometimes those varieties are best produced in certain climates or using techniques that might be better suited for overseas production.
So even if the government wants more domestic production, the demand for those picture-perfect veggies might be pulling in a different direction.
Exactly. It's like a tug of war between national goals and individual preferences.
That's such a good point. It's a reminder that food systems are so complex. They're shaped by all these different factors, from government policies to what consumers want to what companies are doing. And sometimes those factors clash.
Absolutely.
The sources also brought up something that really blew my mind: Japan's reliance on imported fuel.
Yeah, that's often overlooked in discussions about food security.
It's huge, though, right?
It is. Japan is 100% reliant on imported oil.
100%. I knew it was high, but that's a really stark number.
It is, and it has massive implications for Japan's food system. Imagine if the country could magically produce all of its food domestically. Without fuel for transportation, processing, agricultural machinery, it wouldn't even matter.
Wow, you don't often think about that. We tend to focus so much on the food itself, but the entire system is built on this foundation of fuel.
It is, and without energy security, food security is incredibly fragile.
So even if Japan could somehow achieve complete seed sovereignty, that wouldn't solve the bigger issue.
Right. It doesn't address those other vulnerabilities.
Okay, so it's about more than just seeds. It's about understanding the whole web of relationships that makes up our food system.
Exactly. And the sources actually argue for a more holistic approach to food security, one that considers the entire system, from energy to transportation to the social and economic factors that shape how food is produced and distributed.
So where do we as individuals fit into all of this? I mean, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by these huge issues.
It's a common feeling for sure. But I think the sources offer a glimmer of hope. They really emphasize the power of informed consumer choices.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the issues, asking questions about where our food comes from, supporting companies that align with our values, and advocating for policies that promote a more sustainable and equitable food system.
So it's not just about buying local or buying organic. It's about being informed and making conscious choices.
Exactly. And realizing that those choices aren't just personal preferences, they have real-world consequences.
I like that. Our food choices as political acts, it makes it feel less passive.
And the more we understand the issues, the more informed those choices become.
Okay, I'm starting to feel a bit more empowered here. But there's one piece of this puzzle we haven't really explored yet, the cultural side of things. How does Japan's history and traditions play into this whole conversation about seed sovereignty?
That's a great question, and one that the sources delve into quite a bit. They highlight this traditional Japanese practice called tagen, which refers to saving seeds from one year's harvest to plant the next year. This practice wasn't just practical, it was deeply connected to cultural values, connecting generations through the act of sharing seeds and preserving these local varieties that were adapted to specific regions.
That's beautiful. It's such a different way of thinking about seeds than what we often see today.
It is, and for centuries, Taigen played a crucial role in ensuring food security and biodiversity in Japan. But as Japan has modernized and urbanized, this practice has really declined.
So we have this tension between this traditional practice of seed saving and the reliance on those commercially produced seeds.
Exactly. And a lot of those seeds, as we've discussed, are now produced overseas.
Right. It adds another layer of complexity to the story.
It does, and it raises some interesting questions about how we balance tradition and innovation, how we preserve our heritage, while also adapting to the demands of a modern world.
With every layer we peel back, there's a new set of questions. It's like an onion, but a fascinating one.
I love that analogy. It's a reminder that there are no easy answers when it comes to food sovereignty. It's a multifaceted challenge that requires us to engage with all these different perspectives, from the historical and cultural to the economic and political, and to really think about the long-term consequences of the choices we make.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The corporate side, the government's role, consumer preferences, cultural traditions, fuel dependencies. Where do we even go from here? What does the future of seed sovereignty in Japan look like given all these interconnected factors?
Yeah.
Right, so we've explored corporate strategies, government policies, those picture-perfect veggies, even the role of fuel in Japan's journey towards seed sovereignty. Now let's zoom in on something that's been kind of woven through this whole conversation, those F1 seeds. They popped up a few times, but I think we need a deeper understanding of what they are and why they're so important to this whole discussion.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. F1 seeds are a key piece of the puzzle. To put it simply, F1 stands for first filial generation, which basically means these are the offspring of two very carefully selected parent plants. Think of it like plant matchmaking, where breeders are choosing specific parents with desirable traits to create a hybrid with, enhanced qualities.
So it's like taking the best of both worlds from two different plants and combining them into one super seed.
Exactly. That's why they become so popular in modern agriculture. These F1 hybrids often exhibit something called hybrid vigor, meaning they outperform either parent in areas like yield, disease resistance, uniformity, even flavor.
That makes a lot of sense why commercial agriculture would embrace that. But I've also heard some negative things about F1 seeds. What's the deal with that? Isn't there this myth that they're sterile?
Yes, the sterility myth. It gets repeated a lot, but it's not entirely accurate. F1 seeds can produce seeds. It's just that the second generation, those F2 seeds, tend to be less predictable. You might get some plants that resemble the F1 parent, but others might revert back to characteristics of the grandparents or even great-grandparents.
So it's not that they can't reproduce, it's just that the results are kind of like a genetic lottery.
That's a great way to put it. And that's why for commercial growers who need consistency and predictability, sticking with those F1 seeds makes sense.
Right. But for the home gardener, like me just messing around with a few tomato plants in the backyard, are F1 seeds still a good option?
That's where the conversation gets really interesting. For home gardeners, there's a strong argument to be made for exploring open-pollinated or heirloom varieties.
Okay.
These are varieties that have been passed down for generations, often adapted to specific regions and climates, and they come with this really fascinating history.
So instead of chasing the newest hybrid, I could be planting seeds that have a story, a lineage, maybe even a variety that my great-grandmother might have grown.
Exactly. And there's a growing movement of home gardeners who are embracing these heirloom varieties for a few reasons. One is flavor. A lot of heirloom varieties offer these unique and complex flavors that you just don't find in those commercially produced hybrids that, prioritize shelf life and uniformity over taste.
That's true. I've definitely had those supermarket tomatoes that taste like nothing.
Exactly. Another reason is biodiversity. By growing a variety of heirloom varieties, home gardeners actually contribute to preserving the genetic diversity of our food crops. It's like having a safety net for our food system. If everyone's relying on the same few hybrids and a disease wipes them out, the entire system is at risk.
Right.
But if we have this wide range of varieties out there, some are more likely to survive.
That's a great point. It makes you realize that seed saving and growing a variety of plants, even in a small backyard garden, is more than just a hobby. It's a way to contribute to the resilience of our food system.
Absolutely. It's a powerful reminder that even those small actions can have a ripple effect. And by choosing to grow heirloom varieties, you're not just growing food, you're becoming a part of this movement to protect our agricultural heritage and keep those stories alive.
I love that. We started this whole deep dive talking about seed sovereignty on this national scale. But this conversation about heirloom varieties and home gardening brings it back to such a personal level.
Yeah.
It's like reclaiming that connection to seeds and recognizing the power we have to shape the future of food, even in our own backyards.
I love that. It brings it full circle. And I think that's a really empowering message to take away from all of this. It's not just about waiting for governments or corporations to fix things. It's about each of us taking action, whether that's planting a seed, supporting a local farmer, or advocating for policies that create a more resilient and equitable food system.
So what started as a deep dive into seed sovereignty in Japan has become this incredible exploration of our whole food system. We've talked about corporate decisions, government policies, consumer preferences, cultural traditions, fuel dependencies, the importance of biodiversity, and the power of individual action. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. It reminds us that even something as seemingly simple as a seed is connected to this vast network of relationships and systems. And understanding those connections is the first step to making more informed and conscious choices.
I'll never look at a tomato in the supermarket the same way again.
Okay.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what are your final thoughts? What message would you want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
I think the most important takeaway is this. Our food choices have consequences that extend far beyond our individual plates. They impact farmers, they shape communities, they influence ecosystems, and they have implications for future generations. So let's all try to be more conscious and informed eaters. Let's ask questions. Let's support those who are working to create a more just and sustainable food system. And let's never underestimate the power of a single seed.
Beautifully said. This deep dive has been truly eye-opening. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your insights.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for diving in with us. We hope this conversation has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to think differently about the food you eat and the choices you make. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep those seeds growing.